Hello and welcome to the Oxygenaddict Triathlon Podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors tgstore.co.uk, the home of Gore bike wear, Gore running wear and Aquasphere wetsuits. You can get 10% off with the code Oxygenaddict10 and you can win a Gore bike or Gore run jacket at tgstore.co.uk/Oxygenaddict. We're also brought to you by our sponsor Team Oxygenaddict, who you can read about at team.oxygenaddict.com. Event-specific training plans, coaching guidance from me, Coach Rob Wilby, and supportive teammates in a private Facebook group. You can go to team.oxygenaddict.com to learn more. And welcome back to the show. Now, you'll know if you listened last week, I'm flying solo again this week. Helen is still riding her way down through Italy. She's doing really, really well. We've got a little bit of an update from her later on. Her and her husband Rich are putting in some serious 100-mile plus days back to back over a 14-day ride, which is pretty amazing given the heat we're having here is even worse down in Italy. So a little bit of an update from her there. Now, today's episode, really excited to bring you part 2 of the Mark Allen interview. Part 1 was last week and I'll encourage you to go back and listen to that one first if you haven't already. In part 2, Mark talks more about his journey into spirituality and shamanism than he does about triathlon and how he integrated that into his triathlon. And I think you'll be surprised to learn how much of his success he actually attributes to his spiritual practice as much as his physical training. So lots to learn in that one. A little bit of an update from me. Thank you to everybody who Facebooked me and Twittered me. I am still alive, as you can hear, after attempting to complete the 50-mile Pennine Barrier Ultra this weekend. I did manage to get to the finish line, but it was not pretty, I've got to say. I didn't follow any of my own lessons in pacing. I went off far too fast, and then I had a long and very painful walk, limp, stagger and crawl back to the finish line eventually. But as always, I had a brilliant day out. It was really, really, it was an amazing day, super hot. Weather conditions were brilliant, but super hot. Scenery was stunning. A big shout out to Wayne Drinkwater, the organizer and the brains behind actually putting that event on. There were about 100 of the craziest lunatics you've ever met in your life doing this event. Wayne's website is gbultras.com if you fancy a little bit of ultra running action yourself in the UK over the rest of the year. And I'll talk more about the event next week when Helen's back and we'll have a good old chat about that. But needless to say, if you find yourself in 3rd place in your first ultramarathon, it's probably advisable to listen to that voice in your head that says you're probably going a bit too fast. My hamstring went pop at about the 25-mile point and I walked and staggered and limped back to the finish to just about make it home in, I think, a shade either over or under 14 hours in the end. So there was not a lot of speed going on at the end of that event. But I did learn a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about digging in and gritting your teeth when it gets hard. So listen, I really appreciate everyone who sent a Facebook message or an email or a Twitter or whatever. It's quite a big achievement for me to have done something like this, and I really appreciate you all supporting me. Cool. So I think the first thing we'll do is we will jump in and we'll have a little listen to our friend Helen and her first update on her trip all the way down through Italy.
Hello again. It is day 9 about to begin of our Giro de Murray Brown, all the way from the top of Italy to the bottom. Before I carry on about the Giro, first of all I need to say congratulations Mr. Rob Wilby for your mega run. Really, really impressive. I'm so glad that you completed it. I wonder how you're feeling. Rich is here with me this morning. Rich, how are you feeling today after our 200-kilometre ride yesterday?
Sore.
I think that's about it. Sore, and last night we were pretty much in bits. We ended up doing 124 miles. Not all of that was intentional. We sort of got shooed off a motorway by a policeman. So we didn't really mean to go on a motorway. We didn't think it was a motorway. Anyway, we're having a ball and we have 3 more days of riding before we get to the bottom of Italy. So far, our puncture count is at 4. Our pizza count, well, I've lost count. And we are just having a pretty incredible time. Most days we're cycling around 100 miles. It's blooming long days. We have a gelato stop mid-afternoon to keep us going. And yeah, it's been pretty eventful and very unforgettable. So I will be back in the UK for next week, and well done to everybody. I saw a couple of results from the weekend. It looked hot, but it looked like a lot of amazing racing too. Okay, bye.
You're listening to the Oxygenaddict Triathlon Podcast with tgstore.co.uk, the home of Gore bikewear, Gore running wear and Aquasphere wetsuits. tgstore.co.uk is a family-run business of running and cyclists. They use the products you buy. You can get 10% off with the code Oxygenaddict10.
So 200 kilometre day in the hot sun, and ended up riding down along a motorway as well, if you can believe that. Nice work, Hells. We're rooting for you and Rich. I hope you get yourselves down to the finish line in one piece. It's pretty amazing, that a 200k day in the middle of a 15-day, 1,500 mile ride. Very impressive stuff indeed. Alright, we're going to jump over and we're going to have a look at some results. Our results are brought to us this week by tgstore.co.uk. Got to give a big shout out to them. I didn't have to use my Gore-Tex Packlight rain jacket this weekend on the Ultra because it was baking hot. But the really cool thing about it was, being Packlight, it rolled up into a tiny little ball and it sat at the bottom of my little running sack for the entire journey, and I never felt it at all, which certainly wouldn't have been the case with any of my bigger, thicker running jackets. So it was safe in the knowledge that it was there if I needed it. But the real benefit is it rolls up small enough to go into the back pocket on the cycling jersey, even, if you can believe that. So not big, heavy and bulky, absolutely bomb-proof and seam sealed if the weather does come in. So I encourage you to go over and check it out, support the company that supports the show. It's tgstore.co.uk, and you can get 10% off with the code Oxygenaddict10. Right, so results from this weekend then. First thing to mention is that the European Standard Distance Championships in Kitzbühel, the age group championships, Great Britain took home 22 medals, including 7 gold over the standard distance, which is pretty amazing for a little country like ours. Gold medals went to Kate McAteer in the female 20, Victoria Baker in the female 30, Lisa Webb in the female 35, Murielle Cook in the female 40, Patricia Bell in the female 65, and Sandra Abrams in the female 70. Also gold to Henry Parry in the male 18, Dan Jenkin in the male 30, Donald Brooks in the male 40, and Stu Robinson in the male 55 category. Other results we've had coming in over at the Ironman 70.3 European Championships in Denmark. It's getting a bit hard to keep up with which 70.3 championships are going on around the world at the moment. This one was taken out by Andreas Raelert for the men and Annabelle Luxford for the ladies. Looks like Raelert took it out for the guys. Pretty dominant performance, really. 3:42.52 from Andy Bockeret in 3:44 and Nils Fromhold in 3:45. So it's great to see Mike Raelert racing well again. The ladies' race, Annabelle Luxford takes the win in 4:07 from fast-riding Hella Fredriksson, and then Kaiser Sally from Finland in 4:10. Camilla Pedersen there in 4th, and Britain's Natalie Seymour in 7th. Ironman UK 70.3 Staffordshire took place as well, and for those of our international listeners, it is baking hot in Britain at the moment. Temperatures were pushing 30 degrees, so sort of 90 degrees Fahrenheit this weekend. Photographs from the event look amazing, and I had several of the guys that I coach were racing there from Team Oxygenaddict, and all of them have written to say what an amazing event it was, but how incredibly hot it was there as well. On the ladies' side, we had victory for Lucy Gossage. It sounds like she's really on top form, which is great. She was chasing down Kimberly Morrison off the bike, and actually looks like she had a really good ride because she got herself to T2 as Kim Morrison was still in T2. So Lucy Gossage takes the win for the ladies in 4:28 from Nikki Bartlett, who was our first ever interview back in episode 1 in 4:33. So well done, Nikki. It's another step up the podium for you. Who knows, next year maybe you'll be stopping Lucy's taking her 4th win in a row. And 3rd place was Kimberly Morrison in 4:40. Over in the men's race, all kinds of exciting things happened there. We had a return to racing for Phil Graves, who we've had on the show, who's a great lad. He had a fantastic swim and bike, and was saying beforehand he knew he was in good swim and bike shape, but thought he was going to get found out a little bit onto the run. He led back into T2, and then his run was found just a little bit wanting on this occasion. But we had a good result overall. Giulio Molinari from Italy takes it out in 4:01, with Romain Guillaume in 4:03 in second, and Elliot Smales of the UK in third. He's a young lad. He was first out of the water, and he also had the fastest run of the day as well. So if anyone knows Elliot, drop us an email and give us his email address. I'd love to have a chat with him and find out his story. Looks like one to watch for the future. Right, a few other bits and bobs going on. Over in Luxembourg at 70.3, we had wins for Alexander Rotondo of Belgium and Kenneth van den Reschener, Belgium as well. Apologies, Kenneth, for mispronouncing your name there. I don't have Helen there to get this right. But we had Susie Cheetham, who was in the middle of a fantastic holiday road trip, who popped into race and took second in 4:24, with Katja Konchak in third in 4:25. Bas Diederden was second in the men's race, and Tim Burdenbach from Belgium was in third. And other results of note here: Leander Cave and Kevin Collington take the wins at Costa Rica. I've got a brilliant interview with Kevin Collington a few episodes back now, but he's a really lovely guy, and if you've not listened to that one, I encourage you to go back and listen. Also super generous, because he stands out in my mind as having sent through a massive box of stuff for our charity draw back in January, February time, which he posted at his own cost, and cost him a fortune as well to send it over. So really great to see you take another win there, Kevin. Kevin takes it out in 3:43 from Carlos Ferreira of Colombia in 3:47, and Felipe van den Weingard of Chile in 3:49. Leander Cave takes it out in 4:13 from Lauren Goss in 4:18, and Didi Griesbauer in 4:25. Great to see her still racing. She won one of the original Ironman UKs right back in probably the mid-2000s, so yeah, brilliant to see her racing well again. Good stuff. And a couple of other results I want to mention from the UK as well. First up, an event that's very close to my heart, as I'm sure you guys know if you listened to the show last year. Triathlon X bills itself as the world's hardest Ironman. It's one of these Norseman X-Tri type events in the Lake District of the UK, with crazy amounts of climbing on the bike. I think from memory 5,000 metres of climbing on the bike, and about 1,000 or 1,500 metres of climbing on the run, something like that. It ends up with a mountain run to the top of Britain's highest peak and back. Men's race was taken out by Steve Clark, who I believe is a listener of the show, so well done Steve, in 14:26, from Sam Steele in 14:38, and Jonathan Marshall in 14:48. So it's a mark of what a tough event is, that these top athletes are taking that amount of time to do it. In the ladies race, Alison Bell took out the win in 18 hours and 2 seconds from Christine Howard in the female 40 in 18:33, and Sarah Welsh in the female 50 in 11:23. Oh, she must not have finished there, unfortunately. So it looks like there are actually only 2 female finishers there, according to the results I've got on the open tracking event there. Absolutely brilliant, amazing event. If you're into the wilds of the countryside and you're up for a challenge, then I've got to say, get yourselves over there and check that one out for next season. And another race that was taking place again in the Lake District was the Lakesman Iron Distance Triathlon, which is set in Keswick. It's a completely different event to Triathlon X. It's a much faster event, although it's a long way from being flat. This one was taken out by my old pal Joe Duckworth, who it's great to see you get the win, Joe. I know he listens to the show occasionally. He did a 1:12 swim, 4:53 on the bike, which is scorching. It looks like he had the fastest bike split by about 20 minutes, and his aim, he told me beforehand, was to break the 3-hour barrier on the run. So I think he might have been hampered somewhat on that by the 30-degree heat on the day. He managed to pull out a 3:05 though. So yeah, absolutely amazing performance from you, Joe. I think we'll line you up for an interview sometime soon, mate, and get your thoughts being a working age grouper. So overall 9:15 finish time, which is no mean feat on a course like that. Second was Paul Roger in 9:46. Third was Matt Wheeler in 9:57.51. And shout out to Team Oxygen Addict Matt Wackett, who took 4th overall and second in age group, closing with a 3:18 marathon for the second fastest marathon of the day. So hats off to you, Matt. You've worked hard for that, and that's a stonking performance for a PB by nearly an hour. The ladies race, just let me call the results up here. Let's see what we've got going on. Nicola King takes out the win in 11:20 from Amy Earnshaw in 11:37 and Alison Matthews in 11:43. So some great racing, and again, I can't stress enough how blooming hot it's been in this country over this weekend. Anybody who has managed to complete a triathlon at all in this sort of weather, I think, has done incredibly well. But I bumped into a pal of mine, Mike Stockton, who finished Triathlon X at the weekend, and he told me, I'm not sure exactly of the numbers on this, but somewhere in the region of 200 people started Triathlon X and about 50 finished in the individual race. So it goes to show how incredibly hot the conditions were. Really impressive racing there from anybody who's finished a race, and especially an iron distance race in those kind of conditions. Right then, I'm going to do a little bit of Coach's Couch. Coach's Couch is sponsored by team.oxygenaddict.com. So if you're interested in training plan or coaching, then drop us a line over at help@oxygenaddict.com. Or go over and check out team.oxygenaddict.com. It's got all the details of the packages that we offer. We'd love to help you out getting faster for next year. We've got a great community of people there as well who are all involved in driving themselves to the limit and trying to get as good as they can be. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, come over and check it out. We've had a question from Greg Potts that says, regarding swimming, Coach Rob said something about pulling towards the hip about 18 months back, and it's been nagging me ever since. I've been worried I've been rotating wrong since then. So that's a long time to have something nagging in your brain, Greg, so hopefully we can put your mind at rest with this one. What I mean by this is, most people imagine that they swim flat in the water. And by that I mean they swim in the kind of position where if they were just lying on the floor, they just lie on the floor and they rotate their arms and shoulders and move through the water. But as we know, as we get better swimmers, that isn't the case at all. And what ends up happening is we're actually rotating our body through the water to 45 degrees or 55 degrees on one side and then 55 degrees on the other side, backwards and forwards. So if you had that person lying on the floor, they'd actually effectively be rolling on the side on one side and rolling on the side on the other side and lifting the opposite hip right up into the air. Now I'm sure you're doing this naturally already, and what I mean by saying pulling towards the hip is that if you put that person who was lying flat on the floor and you had them do an imaginary front crawl and you had their hand coming down the side of their body and kind of brushing past their hip and down past the leg, that's not where we want your hand as you're swimming in water. What we want to have happen is, as you go into that pull phase of the stroke, you're going to pull your hand into the place where your hip would be if you were lying flat on the floor. But if you're rotating right, you'll rotate that hip out of the way and your hand will pass through that space where the hip was, brush down past your thigh and exit the water somewhere down through your thigh. So the idea of saying to people, I want you pulling towards your hip, is this idea traditionally beginners especially, and people who are new to front crawl, really struggle with this idea of learning that they have to rotate their hips through the water. So by telling them to try and pull their hand through where their hip is, they have to kind of rotate that hip up and out of the water a little bit to make hand for the space to go there. So that's what I mean by saying pulling towards the hip. It means that our hand is going to pass through that space and our hip has to rotate out of the way if we're going to do it correctly. And handily, if you have the right amount of rotation going on there, your hand is going to pass through that kind of space with just about enough space to get a palm in there. And you'll see this if you watch any of those footages on YouTube of the Kona race from underneath the water. You'll really clearly see, especially the good swimmers, rocking from side to side at the hip, and it'll really underline in your head the importance of basically this motion is you snapping one hip down and one hip up and snapping one hip down and one hip up, and that's what's going to produce your propulsion through the water, rather than the thought of pulling your hands through the water. Really what we want in your head is the idea that your hand is fixed in the water, and as you snap one hip down, your hand has got a tight grip on the water, and that's what pulls you through the water itself. A bit like pulling down hard on a lat pull down machine by using a bit of impetus from your hip, really. So yeah, very hard to describe this without standing up in front of you and showing you a video, but one of the Facebook Live videos I'll do one time, I'll stand up and demonstrate this for you. So Greg, if you need any more clarification, feel free to drop us a line at help@oxygenaddict.com. Any other questions you've got, fire them through. You can reach me at coachrobwilby@oxygenaddict.com or help@oxygenaddict.com. You can fire through your coach's couch questions to that address, or you can get us on Twitter. We're at OA Tri Podcast, and on Facebook we are at OA Podcast. All right. Next thing that we want to talk about then today is we're going to head on over and listen to the second part of our interview with Ironman legend, 6-time Kona winner Mark Allen. And the second part of this interview leads directly on from the first half. Mark had just finished talking about how he'd finally managed to win his first win at Kona, which was his 6th attempt. He'd beaten Dave Scott. He'd run a 2:40 marathon. And the story goes that he saw a vision running through the lava fields of Hawaii of a shaman he'd seen in a magazine called Don Jose and Brant Secunda, which he'd seen in a magazine a couple of days earlier. And it was this vision filled him with the kind of mental calmness that allowed him to go on to take the win. So the interview leads directly on from there, and he starts to talk about the immediate aftermath of his victory in Hawaii. And so I wanted to ask you now that the transition from being Mark Allen, just the triathlete, obviously you've had this experience in the lava field of seeing the vision of Don Jose and Brant Secunda. How long after you crossed the finish line did you decide, right, I'm going to explore this, I'm going to find these guys and go and study with them?
Well, it was interesting because I got back to the condo, after the race, and my support crew was asking me for details. What happened out there? How did you win it? What, tell us. And I said, well, I was ready to give up, and then I had this vision of this 110-year-old Huichol Indian shaman, and they thought, ooh, this guy's flipped, It's not quite what you're expecting to hear from somebody who just won a world championship, but it had such a clear and significant impact on my race that I thought there's something greater here that is important for me to explore. And so it was actually shortly after that I went down to Mexico and experienced a retreat with Brant. Don Jose actually passed away just a few weeks before that workshop, so I never met him in person.
Oh wow!
But obviously, I had a strong connection to him, and in that workshop, it was like for the first time I was experiencing a sense of just being happy to be alive. Like I didn't have to do anything to feel good about life. Like life itself is a good thing, then on top, and then everything from there is just bonus. And that was a huge shift for me because I had been hoping that I could, win Ironman, and then I'd feel really good about my life, right?
Right.
And that's so backwards. It's like inner peace, then outer results, not the other way around. And so I have studied with Brant ever since that time. It's been over 27 years now. And it's just a way to connect with the spirit of nature, which science is showing now that we spend time in nature, stress hormones are reduced. It activates the creative problem-solving part of our brain, so we can come up with ideas and solutions that we never could through logic. Human beings are just hardwired to feel good in nature, and that's such a big tenet of Huichol shamanism, just being in nature. And that was such a natural thing for me because I trained in San Diego near the ocean. I trained in Boulder, Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. I loved those natural environments, and that's when I felt the best. And, Brant was really instrumental in helping me to continue to develop that ability to just be quiet. A lot of the tools and practices he teaches, one of the side effects or the positive effects is that it enables you to get your mind to just be quiet. And when we have that silence inside, then it's like we can tune into things that we could never come up with otherwise. So, simple example, I'm reaching for that last glass of Gatorade and something just says go. That was totally illogical. There is no amount of logic that would have said, don't get that last bit of fuel for that last push. it was completely illogical, but that was the solution. That was the answer that enabled me to start to make the break from Dave. So it's been an amazing journey with Brant. He also is an incredible healer, and so there were many times where, I'm like everybody else. I was kind of to be at peak level of performance, I pushed my body, and there were times where I went over the edge and would get injured or get sick. And sometimes the doctors would say, well, there's nothing we can do. You need to take 6 weeks off and just give your body a break. And I go, no, I need to go win Ironman in 6 weeks. And so, that's when, for sure, Brant did healings and would bring my body back, and was such a huge part of enabling me to win 6 Ironmans and 6 starts, something that nobody's done.
And the thing that I really loved about the philosophy that I took away from the workshop I did with you guys was that I think lots of people who are involved in triathlon, in fact lots of people in general in the world, we know we feel better when we're out in nature. We know, or perhaps we don't consciously realize it, but when somebody points out to you, hey, do you know what, if you spend time in nature you actually feel better, your mind will clear. The fact that there's a kind of framework to understand why you feel better when you're out in nature is such a massive thing in the Western world, when so many people don't connect with whatever kind of religion that they were possibly brought up with,
Yeah, it's how we're hardwired to. Human beings evolved in a very natural environment. We're no more genetically adapted to surviving in a shopping mall than a saber-toothed tiger. Our genetics evolved not in a movie theater, but by watching sunrises and sunsets, by walking and moving over uneven landscape, by just feeling a sense of well-being, by being in community, and by being out in that environment. You don't have to have any awareness of it for it to have that effect on you. However, if you adopt practices and tools to actively foster that relationship, as Brant's teachings help you do, then it supercharges the effect.
Yeah.
And that became such a huge part of racing an Ironman for me, because that is a very powerful natural environment, the Big Island. It is like none of the other islands in the Hawaiian chain. It's very raw, it's very demanding, it's very intense. At the same time, it's very nurturing, in the sense that when you test yourself in that intense environment, the island has a way of giving you things that maybe are difficult to swallow, but at the same time will enhance your life forever. And I think that's why people just feel this magic about doing the Ironman in Hawaii. They gain something from it that they know they would have never gotten anywhere else, and it's because of the environment. It's not the distance, it's not even the heat, it's not the sun, it's competing on the Big Island of Hawaii. Because there are other hot Ironmans, and none of them have that unique quality that is the Ironman on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's just amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's something that over that following 6-year period, it sounds like you almost got more in tune with nature and more in tune with the island of Hawaii itself, in terms of, you said that first year when you won, you kind of had a little chat with the island, but did that become much more conscious as the years went by? You were trying to tune in much more with that?
Yeah, one of the things that Brant says, that it's important to feel at home no matter where you go on the earth. The altar of Mother Earth it's all sacred, and so I tried to tune into that sense of the Big Island being a very sacred place. And as I studied with him, it became more of a place where I really did feel at home, which was so different and in stark contrast to how the Big Island felt to me prior to meeting Brant. I would show up on the Big Island, and it was almost like I was being suffocated, or like, that thing of fear, like,
yeah,
like, oh my God, I've got to race in this stuff, and in this lava, and it's black, and it's stark, and it's raw, and it's windy, and that kind of that's not feeling at home. But studying with Brant, it was just a dramatic shift. Like I would show up and I would get off of the plane, and that same air would hit me, and I would just breathe it in and just go, this is so great, And in the race, even in the most intense moments, I'd catch myself kind of looking around to the left or to the right, seeing the lava and how amazing that is, the design in it and the ruggedness and the beauty that's in that. And so you can guess which mindset is the one that brought the best racing out of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've touched on this a little bit already, but you and Brant now run workshops together, don't you, based around the book that you wrote together. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's called, the workshops and the book are called Fit Soul, Fit Body, 9 Keys to a Healthier, Happier You. And each one of the keys it's kind of like the roadmap of what enabled me to win the Ironman. So, it's managing stress, it's learning to quiet your mind, connecting with nature, slowing down to get faster. It's, that was a huge part of how I trained, doing a lot of aerobic base building and then fine tuning that with a little bit of speed work so that I didn't burn my body out. Eating in a way that nourishes my body and helps it rebuild. That key is called invite your inner caveman to the table. But there's also other tools in the book. Honoring yourself, meaning find good thoughts, take time to be quiet. Indeed, exercise, but don't underdo it and don't overdo it. And then there's one called Know and Set Your Quest. And that was, in retrospect, that was such a huge thing for me in 1989. Like I said, I changed what my quest was. It wasn't to try to go win the Ironman. It was to go and have my best race. And then the sort of the partner key to that is living what you ask for. I had to have that courage to keep taking those steps, even though my body was saying, hey, it's time to quit. I know that to live what I asked for meant that I had to rise up above those challenges on the day and to then indeed take it to victory in '89 against Dave. They're simple keys. Each one can help a person indeed feel healthier, to be happier, and those are priceless commodities these days. To feel healthy and right? to enjoy happiness. And it's so simple that all the keys are it doesn't matter whether you're trying to win an Ironman, lose weight, whether you're just starting to sort of maybe restructure your inner environment so that you are more positive. One of the last keys that I'll mention is that we explain how to deal with negative emotions like fear, anger, and jealousy, because they're all human emotions that every single person on this planet has. But managing those so that you can come into a more positive mindset it's like turning the lights on.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I bought your book when it first came out, and I think I was hoping it was going to be, although it doesn't proclaim to be a triathlon coaching manual, I was hoping I was going to find some kind of training plan in there that was going to make me better. And I read it and I'm kind of like, well, okay, that's kind of cool, but it wasn't the training plan I was hoping for. And then sort of, it must be 10 years later now that I read it again after I'd been and done your workshop, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I get it now. This is the fundamental stuff. It's not the stuff that I'm going to try and lay on top of a training plan. This is the stuff that everything else is going to sit on top of. And if you get all those basics right, having that still quiet mind during racing isn't an additional thing that you can add on as a bit of extra training on top of swim, bike, run. It's what's most important out of all of the three of them, I think.
It's the keys in Fit Soul, Fit Body help build the foundation, like you said, upon which you can create great experiences in your life, whether they're racing, whether they're personal transformation, whether it's just feeling better day to day. And that's pretty cool. You can, all of our workshops are always listed on Brant's website, shamanism.com. in his upcoming program section. I don't think we have another one scheduled until next spring. But we've done them here in the U.S. We've done them in South America, over in Europe, a lot of different places. And so maybe we'll be in your neighborhood pretty soon.
You've got to come to the UK, man. After I talked about having done the workshop on the podcast a few weeks ago now when I got back, and we had 3 or 4 people say, hey, tell us when there's going to be one in the UK. So people are interested, Mark. It'd be great if you could run one over here. It'd be fantastic, man.
All right, we'll work on that for sure.
So listen, I want you to wrap this up for us now before you go with the final story that you started to touch on, the 95 World Championships. It's your, am I right in thinking you took 1994 off? You'd won 5 in a row up to 1993, and you took 1994 off basically because you felt like your body needed to recharge, right?
Yeah, I was, winning 5 Ironmans in a row was a big demand, and in '94 I knew that there was just no way that I had the reserve to put in the effort it would take to have another great race there in Kona, and so it didn't matter how much desire I had, my body just wouldn't be able to take it. So I took '94. I stepped back from doing a lot of the long distance training that I had done in previous years, hoping that my body would regenerate, recharge, because I did want to go back another time, because I really felt like I had just a little bit more that I could put into a performance. And so 95 was the year that I did that. I came back, I was 37 years old, which nobody had ever won the Ironman as a 37-year-old at that point. I was trying to win 6 Ironmans and 6 starts. Nobody had done that, not even Dave. He had a loss in between his string. So I was, even before I got to the start line, I had a couple things sort of stacked up against me, a couple impossibles, a couple things that nobody had ever done, which to me was exciting, actually. But I couldn't Google how do you win 6 Ironmans and 6 starts and the last one is a 37-year-old. There was no answer. I had to discover it myself, and so I really relied a lot that year on the work with Brant, because I knew that I could not do the same volume of training that I'd done in the past. I could not do the same volume of training that the young guys 10 and 15 years younger than me were going to be doing to get ready. So physically, I was past the peak. However, I really felt like, in that race, the more time you spend kind of in that champion's mindset where you're quiet, the more time that I would be completely and fully engaged in giving everything I had. The young guys, if something starts to go south for them and they're struggling, if it takes them 4 or 5 minutes to kind of pull themselves together, that's 4 or 5 minutes where they're not given a full effort. If I could do it just in one breath, just going, okay, then you're fully engaged. That takes about 5 seconds. That's a big difference. And there are thousands of moments in the race where you have to pull yourself back together. And so working with Brant very intensely that year was a big part of my training. He did a lot of ceremonies and healings to get my body to come around, because even by midsummer I was still tired, and I thought, man, it's been a year and a half and I'm still not firing on all cylinders. I mean, by July I'd only had maybe 4 or 5 days that really felt like I was on top of it, and the rest of the time I felt like I was still struggling. And so in early August, I went to a retreat in Alaska for 8 days, and he did a number of ceremonies and healings on me to really charge my body up. And you have to understand, in early August, that's when everybody's really ramping up their training to get ready for Kona 2 months later. I took 8 days of no swimming, no cycling, and no running, completely contrary to what every other triathlete on the planet was doing. But I knew how important this was, because winning Ironman is not just a physical effort. It takes everything you have physically, mentally, spiritually to have your best day. Things seemed to be working. I ended up having a great swim, having taken the lead early on the bike, earlier than ever, actually. My heart rate was actually pretty low when I took the lead, and I thought, man, this is going to be easy. This was about 15 miles into the bike, but right away, guys started passing me. First, it was Jürgen Zach, one of the great cyclists in the sport. Right behind him, another guy comes by. It's Thomas Hellriegel, who was 24 years old, 13 years younger than me. And he passed me, and he looked like he was on a motorcycle. And I thought, man, these guys, the two of them working together, I can't let them go. And so I upped my pace. But right away, my heart rate started to get too high. And I knew that if I let my heart rate go too high on the bike, then I would blow up on the run. And I thought that's too big of a risk. But I also kind of calculated in my head and thought, well, I'll let them go, but they'll probably only get 4 or 5 minutes on me by the end of the bike. And I knew that I could run faster than both of them. Unfortunately, when I came off the bike, I was 13 and a half minutes behind Hellriegel, who was in the lead. That's a little different than a 5-minute gap. In fact, nobody had closed that big of a gap to be the champion. So all of a sudden, now I've got a third level of impossibility, of asking myself to do something that nobody had done before. And boy, I came out of the transition area, and I was just trying to, keep my mind quiet, because I knew that thoughts at that point were going to be very critical. And right at the top of the first hill, there's like thousands of people cheering, and there was these these 3 old ladies who were looking at me, and I could see one of them. She's clapping, she's going, "Go Mark, go Mark, go Mark! Ah, he doesn't look so good." And that thought sunk in, and about a mile later, I felt so lousy. I thought, I can't even finish, and then I couldn't hold that negative stuff out anymore. It's like, Hellriegel, he's 13 and a half minutes ahead of me. I got to make up 30 seconds a mile every mile if I'm going to catch him at the finish. I can't do that. Hey, there's my hotel. Just call it a day. Living what you ask for, one of the keys in our book, means that you have to take things to completion. If I gave up, if I quit, there was no way I could honor the effort that Brand had done to get me ready. There was no way I could honor the effort of my training partners who had helped me that year. There was no way I could honor just the fact that I was trying one more time. So I was able to get my mind to be quiet, and then the answer really came. Something just said, just get to the finish line. This is your final Ironman. Honor yourself and your career by at least getting to the finish line. And I realized, the way I felt right then, if I could get to the finish, that indeed would be a great success, because I was really not feeling good. And literally, I said, I'm going to do it no matter what it takes, even if I have to walk every step of this marathon. I got into the sport in 1982 to be a finisher. I'm closing out my Ironman career, and I know that I'm going to be a finisher. And in the instant that I made that commitment, Greg Welch in 4th place, 10 seconds ahead of me, stopped in the middle of the road to stretch his back. I passed him, made the first pass on the marathon, and then suddenly it's like I was back in the game. I went from 5th to 4th, eventually to 3rd, eventually passed Jürgen Zach to move into 2nd. With 8 miles to go, I was told that Hellriegel was 4 minutes ahead of me. So, I was making up 30 seconds a mile, but I was still only on pace to catch him at the finish line. That's not a good place to catch a guy 13 years younger than you when you are sprinting for a world championship. I needed something else. I couldn't find it. Hellriegel, he's still 4 minutes ahead. I can't even see the guy. I'm not making up enough time. I need something, but I can't find it. Finally, I got my mind to be quiet, and something came back to me that Brand had said. He said, if you need help, call out to that island. It will help you. That island is alive. It's just as alive as you or I, and it will hear you. And so I just drew all my attention away from Hellriegel, and I said, hey, Big Island, help me here. I'm going to give everything I have, even if I completely blow up in these 8 miles, but I need something extra. The next mile, I made up 40 seconds. The one after that, a little over 50. The mile after that, I made up 1 minute and 15 seconds on the guy who'd been leading the race for over 6 hours. Finally, at mile 23, I came up behind him, closed the gap, made the final pass of my Ironman career, and indeed went on to win that 6th and final title. And it was, it was such an impossible day. It was a huge risk, because I knew that if indeed I won, people would say, I would go down as one of the greats in our sport. But if I didn't win, I wouldn't be remembered as Mark Allen, the 5-time Ironman champ. I'd be remembered as Mark Allen, the old guy who came back for one too many. And that was a huge risk. But it had meaning for me to try. That's that key. Know and set your quest. I went there to give a performance that I had never done before. And indeed, because it was so impossible and I had to overcome so many moments when I wanted to quit, that was the greatest race I ever put together in my career. And again, to go back to what I said very early in this podcast, the TV cameras never showed that. They didn't show, you couldn't see that I was literally steps away from just calling it quits and going to my hotel. You couldn't see the thousands of moments where I just wanted to give up. I mean, that was very, very hard to keep pulling myself back to that sort of champion's mindset where, okay, get quiet, stay fully engaged. Okay, get quiet, stay fully engaged, over and over and over and over again.
It's so good to hear that, because so many people experience those moments, the I'm going to quit and go to the hotel moment. And to hear the 6-time world champion say, you know what, guys, this happened to me thousands of times during this race, where all anybody knows about is I won, and you see the me sprinting down and waving the flag and doing the fist pump. It's such a key part of it, isn't it, to be able to get your mind to go quiet and keep resetting yourself like that. That's incredible, Mark.
Thank you.
Hey, well, listen, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling your story. I had a fantastic time when I came to your seminar. I'd massively encourage anybody to go to it and check it out if they get the chance. I hope we can get you to the UK to do one next year, because it would just be brilliant. For me, this podcast has been amazing because, like you said, you remember watching your first Ironman on TV in 82. I remember watching my first Ironman in 89 when it was shown on the British TV show on a Sunday morning. They had this Wide World of Sport type thing on, and it was you and Dave Scott racing each other. And I remember sitting there thinking, this is insane. These guys have been, called my dad in, and these guys have ridden 112 miles around Hawaii. It's just the most amazing thing. And at the time I was a track runner and wasn't capable of running further than 1,500 meters. And then years later, that thought popped in my head of, man, I wonder if I could do a half Ironman. I wonder if I could do an Ironman. And so the story that you set in motion set me in motion, sets other people in motion, and hopefully through the podcast we'll keep pushing that forward to more and more people to find out what they're actually really capable of, right?
Yeah, sounds great. Hopefully those stories will spark something for people. And you never know what you can do until you have an inspiration and just try. And then once you set something in motion and indeed live what you ask for, meaning do the training, stick with it, even through the tough moments, in the end, then amazing things can happen. You can have great, amazing experiences and meet great people like yourself, and travel to great places. I hope Brant and I will work on that, coming to the UK. That would be really fun.
Awesome. So if people want to find out more about you and Brant, the address is shamanism.com, isn't it?
Yeah, his workshops and the Fit Soul Fit Body retreats are listed there. And then for my coaching, it's markallencoaching.com.
All right, fantastic stuff. Well, listen, Mark, it's been brilliant having you on the show. I know the audience are going to love this, and it's been fantastic for me to get to talk to you. So again, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Rob. Take care.
All right, there we go. That's a pretty amazing interview with Mark Allen. As I've said to you a couple of times, he's been one of my greatest heroes and inspirations, and was probably the reason that I ended up getting into triathlon in the first place. So it was amazing to meet him in person. It was amazing to get the interview done. Apologies for a bit of the sound quality there. We unfortunately, it turns out, had a pretty poor connection on Skype, and there's a lot of crackle on Mark's end, which is absolutely gutting for me, having like the interview of my life and have the sound quality not come out great. But I've tidied it up as much as I can. I know a couple of you contacted me last week to say there were problems with the audio quality, and I really appreciate you doing that. Thanks very much. But be assured, I did everything I could to clean it up, and I have done again this week as well. Alright, so that pretty much brings us to the end of this week's show. Next week, Helen will be back in the studio with me. We'll have a good old chat about her trip through Italy. We'll have a chat about my run at the Pennine Barrier Ultra if you want to hear any more about that. And we'll have more race results, including Ironman UK 70.3 in Wimbledon down in Exmoor. So yeah, until then, have a great, safe training and racing week. Our sponsors have been tgstore.co.uk and team.oxygenaddict.com. I'm Coach Rob Wilby. Helen Murray has not been with us because she's riding through Italy, but have a great week.